My name is Laird Klingler. I'm a librarian with the Cornish Historical Society. We're here at the home of the Barkers on Tift Road for an interview. The date is November 3rd, 2017. Billy Scharf will be doing the filming. Jim and Regina, thank you for inviting us.
A pleasure.
Before we get on the personal aspect, Jimmy is going to take pictures of the home on the wall. Tell us a little bit about the history of this home.
The first transfer of the house was in 1798, and so we believe the house was built around 1796 or 1797, and it's gone through a lot of changes over the years. My folks actually bought it in 1939. At that time, my dad was teaching at Kimball Union Academy, and we lived in faculty housing there, or they did. I wasn't born yet. And they bought the house, and then my dad left Kimball Union during the war, was in the Navy during the war, came back to Kimball Union in 1946-7 school year. And in the summer of 1947, when I was 6 months old, they moved to St. Paul's School in Concord, and my dad taught there for the rest of his career. And we used this as a summer house. And then they redid it during their working years and retired here in the early mid-70s.
So, but the home you think was built at around 1796?
96 or 97. It was owned at one point by Corbin, bought it when he was putting in Corbin's Park, which abuts us, and then resold it afterwards.
Do you know some of the early owners?
Well, Joseph Tift, who the road is named after, bought it in 1878 and owned it for 12 years. There were a number of owners before that. I don't know why the road wasn't named after them, and that Tiff got the privilege. The Putmans owned it at one point, and that's a fairly large family in the area in Charlestown, Claremont, and in Cornish. Other than that, my folks bought it from someone named Irene Mott, M-O-T-T. I don't know anything about her.
What did they pay for the house?
Yeah, my folks bought the house and 56 acres for, I think it was $1,300. Yeah.
How many acres now do you have?
We have 40 now, and they, in the, must have been the late 70s, early 80s, they carved off 16 acres and gave it to my sister. And so there's 16 acres with her house and 40 acres.
That's up the road.
Up the road. She has sold it and no longer lives there. But
so we are right adjacent to Corbin Park here.
Right across the road. Yeah, we look over. We often see the animals working the fence line. Boar. We see elk.
I asked you before that wild boar do get out occasionally.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. When I was a child up here, the boar were out a lot, and they would come into the back field in an evening and absolutely destroy a half acre by rooting, and you go out and look like someone had harrowed the field. And they used to have the local farmers used to organize hunts for them. And they would send some people in and get up in trees early in the morning before light, and then they would all start in different roads and try to drive the boar into the set where the people were in the trees and try to shoot them.
You remember that?
Oh yeah, I never was on the hunt, but I remember people talking about it. There were a couple of wallows in a stream that comes across our property that they use regularly. And we didn't see them very regularly. I had them kind of grunt at me a few times.
You'll have to help me. I'm not certain I know what a wallow is.
Just a mud area in the stream bed.
Oh, I see.
And they just love to go down in the mud and roll around in the mud and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, good. Now, maybe we just could start with the personal aspect. Maybe we begin by asking where and when you were born. Regina?
I was born in 1956 in Danville, Illinois, so I'm a Midwesterner. My paternal grandfather was an immigrant from Lithuania, and he met my grandmother in Pennsylvania. He moved to Westville, Illinois to work in the coal mines, and he worked until he could afford to buy land and build a house, and then he married my grandmother. And my father was an only child, and actually his father, my grandfather, died in that coal mine at the age of 62. My dad was 16. I think he was 15 at the time. So my father, at 16, graduated from high school. He graduated early, and all he wanted to do was fight in World War II. So he convinced his mother to sign for him, and while he was in boot camp, the war ended. So he served his time in the Navy, and came home and met my mother, who was from Georgetown, Illinois, fell in love, and stayed in the house with my grandmother, and had 6 children. So there were 9 of us living in that little house in Westville. And it's kind of ironic because we've all kind of gravitated towards New England. My parents now live in Claremont. I lived in New London, Connecticut with my first husband, and I really loved it there. I thought it was a beautiful area. But he kept talking about this land that he had in Cornish that his adopted grandfather had won in a poker game. And, you know, it was just like a far-off fantasy to me. And one time we drove by it, and he said, well, we're going to build a house there. And
Where was that?
it's on Townhouse Road,
Townhouse?
744. It's, who are the neighbors? Rooks. It's 2 houses down from the Rooks. So we built
Going
the house.
towards...
Going towards Windsor. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
So what happened was I had my daughter and went to Illinois and stayed with my parents for a month or 2, and my husband called me up and said, come on, the house is ready, good to go. I landed at the airport in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and he took me to Hotel Coolidge, and I'm saying, why aren't we going to the new house? It's September. And it was because the new house was nowhere, not even close to being
He was just trying to get you
he
here.
just wanted to get me here. And so, you know, we quickly, you know, secured things and made it very livable. And I remember going to the Cornish store and meeting Sandy Powers, and she said, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Regina DeBoer. And she goes, I had no idea Stephen had a wife and child. And I'm like, well, great, he's been here for months, you know. But yes, so my children went to the Cornish school system and on to Hartford High School. And we were a part of the ski program, which was just ran so beautifully by so many community members, and I think it was like just a very special program, and the school was just a wonderful school for my kids.
Good.
They loved it. Yeah.
Jim, tell us about your childhood.
Well, I grew up as a faculty brat at St. Paul's School, and then we would come up here in the summer, and
But your father started at KUA.
started at KUA. Actually started teaching at Horace Greeley High School in Ossining, New York, which is where he met my mother, who was also a teacher there. They eloped on Christmas Eve, drove into New York City and got married, and came back, went to their respective homes, and on Christmas morning they told their respective parents that they had gotten married the night before. And my dad used to, in the summer, was camp counselor at a camp, I think it was Blue Moon in Maine. And there was some people from KUA that also were up there in the summer, and they recruited them, so they moved up from, they were living in White Plains at the time, moved up to New Hampshire. So I was actually born in Hanover, and then when I was 6 months old, we moved to Concord. And so my early childhood, the summers in my early childhood were all spent up here. My dad was absolutely, both my folks, they just absolutely loved Cornish, loved this place, and put their heart and soul in it. And every summer they would do something else on the house. I can remember when we first came up here, we had no running water. We had a 2.5 holer at the end of the woodshed. and we had no electricity. We heated and cooked by gas, propane gas, and had a temporary kitchen, which is now the den, which was there for 30-some years as a temporary kitchen. But then the L was stripped down, jacked up, foundation put, and they set the frame back down and redid the whole L.
Just to place us, it's the white part of the house
yes.
as you look at it now.
Yes.
You know that.
Yeah, and that's now our kitchen and our sitting. I mean, in the winter, we just live out in that room. We have a fire in the fireplace every night and then live there. They knew people at KUA, so who had kids my age, so they were really good in having, like, the Townsends. Ira and Sarah Townsend had a son, Jimmy, and so he'd come over here for 2 or 3 days, and so I had someone to play with. And
I wanted to ask, what was it like growing up
yeah.
here?
And my dad was really good. Every afternoon he'd quit working and he would take us usually to Windsor to swim. Sometimes we'd go down to the swimming area down on the flat. We used to get our mail down at the flat.
What was the swimming area in the flat?
It's right by the first home on School Street. It's still there. Yeah, and there's a little swimming hole there.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, yes.
Yeah.
It's sort of diagonally across from the store then, right?
It's up School Street. If you're at the store, go up School Street to the first, and then the road curves. There's a bridge there. It's right there.
So that was a swimming hole?
Yeah,
I see.
And we'd go to the general store. Mr. Thornton, I think, was the
Thornton's General Store.
Yeah,
yes.
And I can remember him. I used to think he was 10 feet tall. He'd wear his glasses down, and we'd go get our mail, and we'd be looking up in the. I can remember a little like a window, service window in the post office part, which was right in the store. And I can remember him staring down, looking over his glasses at us, and but great person, very friendly, and so I can remember that.
Now the Thornton store was diagonally across from where the general store is.
Yes,
now.
Yes, yeah.
That was the home. Hannah Shad.
Yes.
Yes, had her bit of antiques. Yes. And Thornton's was a store and the post office there.
Exactly. Yeah. Other things I remember, the Tift Road at that point was really a lane. There was grass in the middle. There were only 2 houses on the road. The house that is now the Catarinos, which I believe is a couple of years older than this house, and us. And the road really ended right here. It was an even worse lane going up because there is a gate to the park up further. So, when I got older and I went to private school, and my dad taught at private school, so we had our vacations together. My sister went to public school. My mother taught in a public school.
And where was this?
In Concord.
Concord.
Yeah, my mother taught at Runlet Junior High School, and so my dad and I would come up here a lot, and just the 2 of us on vacation, particularly in December before Christmas. We'd come up. Of course, we'd have to drain all the water, everything out of the house when we close it up for the winter. So we would basically live in what is now our living room where we're sitting, and the kitchen, and we'd keep a fireplace burning 24/7. We'd put our sleeping bags down on the floor right here and sleep right in front of the fire, and spend 3 or 4 nights up here and snowshoe. We'd go hunting. Never shot anything, but we'd go out in the woods and.
Did you ever sneak into Corbin Park?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Actually, we used to get our water out of there. We have water rights to a well that's up in the park.
Oh.
And so I can remember a couple times where we had to change the wooden cover on the well, and helping my dad do that, and getting and sliding it on ladders up over the fence and then carrying it up there. But yeah, in high school I'd come up with some friends from high school, just us without my folks, and we would have some good times up here. Yeah, my folks never found out about, and part of those would be sneaking into the park.
Into the park.
Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Let's move on now to your careers. Regina, tell us about your career.
Okay. For the last 25 years, I've really worked for nonprofits. You know, I did a lot of social service type of work. Just recently, for the last 13 years, I've been with Valley Court Diversion Program. So I've always had a great interest in social justice and very compassionate towards people who find themselves in a tough spot. I worked for WISE, which is another pretty well-known nonprofit in the Upper Valley. It's a domestic and sexual violence agency. And then I found out about this opportunity at Court Diversion and just really piqued my interest. So I applied for a job that I knew I really wasn't, shouldn't have been eligible for. I didn't have all the background necessary. And they hired me anyway. They took a chance on me. And I think about the second day into my job, I found out that it was in debt substantially, and programmatically the Attorney General was ready to just pull the cord on it. You know, it was a failing program.
Well, tell us what court diversion is.
So court diversion is part of what we do. We do several things, but we work with people who have been that have received a civil violation or a criminal charge. And basically they go to court. Now this is in Windsor County, so it's the entire county. They go to court and they're charged with crime, and the state's attorney can decide whether or not they can have the opportunity for the diversion program. And court diversion is made up of a panel of community members. And what we do is we embrace the philosophy of restorative justice. The idea that the person takes responsibility and is held accountable for what they did, and they work with the community and with victim input to figure out how to right the wrong. So we try to get victims as engaged as we can in the process so that they can be made whole again. You know, for instance, if somebody smashed their mailbox, and the person said, yes, I did it, the logical, contract that we would create would be to have that person buy a new mailbox and repair it. So we see people from age 10 to age 90 in this program.
This is to avoid jail sentences?
It's to avoid having a criminal record. So they're charged, but it's pre-arraignment.
And
so
we are talking about Vermont now, right? The White River Junction.
We do.
Right?
We serve all of Windsor County in Vermont, and we serve the lower part of Grafton County, about 9 communities now. So we do both New Hampshire and Vermont, 2 very different states with different philosophies, but we've managed to bring the philosophy of restorative justice over into the New Hampshire side of things, and it has really been embraced by a lot of the communities, Lebanon, Hanover, Enfield, Cana, and Lyme. We also, we see Dartmouth students for underage drinking, possession of marijuana, on the New Hampshire side of things, and in Vermont we see youth in the same way for possession of marijuana and underage drinking, which makes so much sense because instead of just giving them a fine that their parents end up paying, we have an opportunity to engage with them, to see how they're doing, to have them screened to see if they have the potential for substance misuse, and then they just move on.
And they can avoid a criminal
and
record.
It's sort of risk, need, and responsivity with all people that we work with.
Yeah.
The higher the risk, the more we'll lean on them and work with them. The lesser the risk, the less intervention we want, because we don't want to have them become involved in the criminal justice system at all. Recently, we took on a new program called Tamarack, and I'm very, very excited about it because the focus of Tamarack is to work pre- and post-arraignment in Windsor County with individuals who have cycled through the system multiple times, many, many charges. And they're screened. The people that we end up working with have either significant substance abuse problems or mental health problems. So we can finally get them off that, cycle of just committing crimes because of homelessness, poverty, addiction, so on and so forth. And we have about 85 of those cases at this point in
Really?
time, and we last year saw over 1,000 people, just to
And
give you an idea.
how big is your staff?
We're now at 11. I never thought I'd see the day that we would get to that point, but we're very busy. We have another program, and I could go on forever because obviously I'm very passionate about it. It's called Balanced and Restorative Justice, and this is for youth who are at risk of becoming involved in the justice center, the justice system. So it's more of a mentoring like thing, like we screen them and we look at the risks, but we also look at their pro-social involvement. So the idea is to lower the risk that could get them involved in the justice center system and work on the pro-social side of things to get them engaged in healthy relationships with friends and after-school activities and whatever it is we
It's
can
very
do.
admirable. I'm learning a lot from you. I didn't know much about that.
It's a wonderful
Good.
program,
And you're right in White
we
River
have
Junction,
volunteers,
right?
and we're in
White
White
River.
River Junction, and I'll put in a little plug because we're always looking for community volunteers, and New Hampshire people can volunteer on the Vermont side of things. It doesn't matter. We're all one happy
I see.
family, really. Yes.
Good, good.
But
Okay.
so
Jim, tell us about your career.
Went to college for 2 years, dropped out because I had no idea what I wanted to do, and all I was doing was partying, and got drafted.
Where'd you go to school?
My first college was Paul Smith's College in upstate New York, and where I really wanted to focus on wildlife management and forestry. Didn't really like the school, which had something to do with me dropping out. I then was drafted. I applied for and was given a conscientious objector status, a 1AO, which is you're in the military but as a non-combatant.
Was that during Vietnam period?
It was during Vietnam. So I was in the medical corps of the Army and trained first as a corpsman, combat medic, and actually was going through that training during the Tet Offensive. So it was a lot of angst at that point. The class that graduated 2 weeks ahead of us, all of them went to Vietnam. Got to our class and only 2 went to Vietnam, and they had volunteered. I was then sent for additional training to be a scrub nurse in the operating room to hand instruments to surgeons. Then went to Virginia for on-the-job training in a hospital on a base at Fort Eustis, Virginia. Then got orders to a field hospital, battalion aid station in Erlangen, Germany. And when I was over there, there was a little article in the Stars and Stripes saying they were looking for lifeguards in Berchtesgaden, which is the Armed Forces recreation area in the middle of the German Alps. I sent a letter and applied for that and got transferred to Berchtesgaden, where I was a lifeguard in the summer, and then they have a ski area there as well, and I'm a skier, so I stayed and skied. So considering what was going on in another part of the world at the time, I was very fortunate. Came back to the States. I actually took my discharge over there and traveled for 3 or 4 months. Came back to the States and went to the University of Vermont and graduated a degree in education. Taught public school for 5 years. My second child, my daughter, was born, and I think I was making $7,500 as a fifth-year school teacher. Decided to go into the business world. Worked 4 years in the investment business in Burlington, Vermont, and then was hired by National Life Insurance Company in Montpelier, where I headed training and development for 10 years. So stayed in the education field there. Left there with a golden handshake. They did some downsizing and were offering 1 year's salary and benefits if you left. So I left in 1990 and started my own consulting business. and we did training and development plus human resource
And
consulting.
where was this?
I actually started the business. I was living in Norwich, Vermont. I
Norwich.
moved down to Norwich, and
Did your family still maintain the ownership of this home, though?
yes, yeah. My dad passed away in '89, and then my mother lived here until she passed away in '99.
So it always has stayed in your family.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted you with Norwich,
Yeah,
though. Please,
yeah.
go on.
And my mother got sick. She had kidney failure, and at that point, I sold my house in Norwich, knowing I was inheriting this, and lived in rented a condo for about a year. My mother passed, and then I moved here in January of 2000.
2000.
Yeah, so I've been here a little over 17 years.
Well, how did you two meet then?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the rest of my
You can tell
career,
a
you know, I
story.
had my business for almost 20 years, and then got hired by a client of mine, a long-term client, Marion Graves Corporation. Year and a half after that, they were bought by Airgas, a Fortune 500 company. They offered me VP HR, which I did for about 3.5 years, and a lot of travel, a lot of stress, and decided I'd retire. So I retired 5 years ago. We met, I was on the board of WISE, Regina had mentioned, and we had lost our assistant director, and we're looking for a new assistant director, and the board asked me to be involved with the interview process because of my HR background, and Regina applied for the job, and I interviewed her.
Oh.
And came away from that interviewer, and I was single at the time, and came away thinking not only is she really qualified for this job, she's also a terrific person. And so she went to work for WISE, and I was the chair of the board, and so got to know her there. And after a few months, we started dating, and the rest is history.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had the interview, and I was so I really am impressed with good questions, and he was such a great interviewer. I came home and I called my mother and I said, I don't know if I got the job, but I just think I met the man that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with.
Oh, really? It's so
And
great.
this is a true story. And I mean, I had no idea. And it was a little awkward, but he was not in a position, obviously, of power over me. He recused himself from anything that had to do with my position at WISE. He said that he was going to ask me out on a date, but he never really did. And then we ran into each other, and he said, I'm going to give you a call. And I said, great, you have 24 hours, and if you don't call me, don't even bother. So he called me up, and he said, hi, this is Jim. And I said, Jim who? You know, and he's like,
Stop me
Jim.
short.
Why did you hesitate so long?
Well,
You know, I was
look
concerned
good.
because, you know, I was still chair of the board, and I didn't want her to go out with me
right.
because of my position. And I'm just nervous about, you know, sexual harassment and so forth. And so I was just leery and cautious. And then when we started dating, I brought it up with the full board, said, this is what's going on.
Sure.
If you're uncomfortable, I'll resign right now because Regina really likes her job. And the board said, as long as you recuse yourself from anything that has to do with her, then we're okay. So I think I had like 6 or 7 months left as chair of the board, and then I left. I'd done my 6th year, so I left.
You have children also.
Yes.
You know, I've seen
yes.
some pictures of
Yes,
the house.
yes, I do. I have a daughter.
Yeah.
She's 37. She lives in Charlton, Mass. And her and her husband have 3 boys. I had a son named Dane, and he is deceased. He died May 2016. Great guy. He worked in the film industry. He built movie sets and spent a lot of his time in Massachusetts, and was actually here when he passed, helping me out on Townhouse Road with the house that I own. He was trying to help us get it back on track. I had rented it out for a long period of time. But Every Christmas we have a big, we call it the Yankee swap, and having 6 brothers and sisters and a big extended family, we have quite the bash.
Yeah.
We really do.
And you're a grandmother.
Oh, I'm a grandmother.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
And that's what keeps me going.
Grandbabe, we call it the grandbabe.
The grandbabe. I have 3 absolutely beautiful grandsons, and they remind me a lot of my son. They look a lot like him, and that's
Massachusetts.
yes. So it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes away. I've got it down to a science. I just can zip there anytime.
Near
and,
Boston? Or is it?
it's off of 90. It's near Boston.
I see.
Maybe
South of Worcester.
yeah, I get my
Sturbridge.
directions mixed up, but they enjoy coming here a lot. They come here less because now they're becoming teenagers and
Sure.
pretty social. So yeah,
Well, you're still working. I'm sure you do.
not
other
for long.
Yeah. I like to ask now about volunteer activities.
Yeah.
And of course, Jim, your major volunteer activity is being head of the Conservation Commission.
Correct.
And I don't want to leave anything else out, but let's start with the Conservation Commission.
Okay.
I think, well, first of all, tell us the people that are on it, and then tell us what does the Conservation Commission do?
Okay. Yeah, I joined. We have a conservation easement on this property that my folks put on, and first or second year that I was living here, the Conservation Commission needs to walk every conserved property that the town of Cornish is the primary easement holder on every year to make sure there's no violations to the easement. At that point, Don Snowden was the chair of the Conservation Commission, and Don came up with a few other people, and I went out with them and walked the property, and shortly thereafter he recruited me. So I've been on the commission, I think, 15 or 16 years. I've been chair for 5. And our major goal is to help landowners that may be interested in putting a conservation easement on their property, help them through the process.
Well, tell us what a conservation easement is.
Conservation easement is a easement on the property where the landowner gives up the development rights. They sell the development rights so that the property can never be developed in perpetuity. So once it's on, it's on. And what happened, the process very basically is you do 2 appraisals. You do an appraisal on the current market value of that property, and then you do an appraisal on if the property cannot be developed. So the difference between the development price and the non-development price is basically the value of the easement. So then the landowner has a couple of options. They can either donate the easement, the value of that easement, to the town of Cornish. We work very close with the Upper Valley Land Trust and really prefer that it be given to the Upper Valley Land Trust. And they can either donate it and then take that value as a write-off off their taxes until it's used, so it will roll forward. Or the Conservation Commission maintains a fund, and we can actually buy the easement from the landowner. Or you can do a combination. We have landowners that say, well, we'll donate 60% of the value of the easement, and we'd like the Conservation Commission to pay us for the 40%. We've had situations where they've donated the entire easement value and come to us and said, would you help us with the appraisal and the legal costs of doing that? So number of different ways. The money in our conservation fund comes from several sources. If someone takes a property out of current use, there is a 10% penalty tax on the value of the land coming out of current use. That goes to the Conservation Commission. It used to be 100% went to the Conservation Commission. About 7 years ago, when the economy was tough and our taxes were tough, We switched that formula, and we're now giving 40% of the value of the land coming out to the general fund of the town of Cornish, and we're keeping 60%.
I remember that at the town meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Not everyone agreed with that.
correct, correct.
Many people felt that the Conservation Commission should have kept all the money.
Yeah, and there were people that thought we shouldn't keep any. And the town has been great. We have a operating budget of about $700 a year, and the town also has been contributing out of tax money $4,500 a year that goes into our conservation fund. So. We maintain that, and we'll work with landowners any way we can.
Is the fund in good shape?
The fund is in very good shape, yes. We've been very fortuitous, it's been fortuitous that the last 3 or 4 easements that have been placed on property have been 100% donated. So in one case, we covered legal costs. But other cases, it's been 100% donated, so we haven't had to use any of the conservation fund. We have 2 other funds that we maintain. The Palmer Fund, which was money left over when the town bought the CREA property, and I think there's a little over $10,000 left in that fund, and we use that exclusively on CREA. We just did some a couple of weeks ago. The Boy Scouts have been terrific in, building observation hut there. They built kiosks for us, and we had a second kiosk built about a month ago. And, we picked up the cost of the wood and so forth for that, and that comes out of the Palmer Fund. We also pay for the Four Winds program books, which is an environmental program that's taught at our elementary school. And so we pay for the student and instructor materials for that each year. And then we have a third fund, which is the Barker Fund, that my dad, who was a longtime chair of the Conservation Commission, and I think one of the original members of the Conservation Commission. If he wasn't original, he joined it shortly after it was formed. And in his will left some money to the Conservation Commission. And so we have a small amount. And we use that money for things that are just out of the ordinary activities for... we have members that may attend a conference, and we'll pay for the conference out of that money. When Regina and I got married, we asked people, instead of gifts, if they would make donations to the Barker Fund, and so we were able to build it up more at that point, which was really nice. So that's our main focus is, walking the property and helping people that want to put easements on.
I saw in your annual report that you've conserved over 3,000 acres, under easements.
Yes, yeah. We're at about, I think we're about 12% of the land in the town of Cornish is under easement at this point.
Now, when people have an easement, they can also retain the capacity to subdivide portions of it.
Only if they do the subdivision before the easement is put on.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so in our case, on this property, my folks knew they wanted to carve off that 16 acres. So what they did was they did the subdivision of carving off the 16 acres and then put the easement on the property. Most easements will carve out 1, maybe 2 acres around the house. So you can, we had one recently down at the Fox Farm where they carved out a 1 acre plot in the middle of the property for a house, and then the rest is conserved. So
that has to be done before the easement.
It should be, yes, yeah.
The town forest is a separate group, as I understand.
Yes. Yeah. Jenny Prince.
I'm sure individually you probably help, with that, but but that's not part of the Conservation Commission.
It is not, no. Jenny Prince and the Town Forest Committee manage that, do a wonderful job with that piece of property.
So would it be fair to say that your goal is to preserve open space?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is. It is to preserve the natural resources and the scenic beauty of the town of Cornish is really our objective. Okay. Yeah.
Have I left out any volunteer activities that I should?
I do one more. I work with a group up in White River called Friends of Veterans, and it's a nonprofit that helps veterans with small grants for what we call a step up. We don't pay for ongoing expenses, but a veteran that their car breaks down and they just don't have the money to fix a car, so they can apply to us. And I find it incredibly rewarding. It's very sad at times with the situation some of our veterans are in, but at this point, those are the two volunteer work that I'm doing. So, yeah.
And I was on the board of WISE for a couple of years, but then I got so involved with my own work that was really hard to manage.
Sure. Yeah.
My parents live in Claremont, so they moved this way. And Jim spends Wednesday afternoons with them, which is very helpful, and I spend some time with them. But I'm going to retire in August, so I'm very excited about that. And I'm starting to look for opportunities myself in Cornish in particular, and I'm interested in the neighbor to neighbor program.
Yes.
And yeah,
You'll have to come to one of our breakfasts.
Well, yes, I go to an all-day meeting in Montpelier on that Wednesday that you guys meet at the store, and I always think, what is this group of people doing here? It occurred to me that it was neighbor to neighbor, so yeah, that's something I'm very interested in.
When we've done these interviews, we always like to ask Cornish past and present, and people generally say two things that they've noticed in terms of change would be, first of all, the condition of the roads and the declining school enrollment. Now, talk a little bit about the roads, because you were here at a very early date.
Yeah.
What was it like driving up? Well, of course, you weren't here for the winter, though, were you?
No. When we'd come up in the winter, they would plow up to the Caterino's house, and I don't remember who was living in the house at that point. There was someone there, and they would plow just past there and then back into their driveway. So we'd park right past that driveway, and then we had to pack everything in from there. So we'd usually come up, we'd bring snowshoes with us and come up and get a toboggan, go back down and carry our stuff up on a toboggan.
How about the mud season?
Mud season on this road used to be horrendous, really horrendous. I mean, there were times when I first moved here, where you couldn't get past, the end of Tiff's Road, especially that intersection right there. Everybody on the road was leaving their cars down
on East Road.
On East Road, leaving their cars down there and hiking up. I very quickly bought a Jeep to help, but they have really done a marvelous job in building the road up. Sure. And now we really don't have any problems at all. The road crew's done a wonderful job on this road.
Every now and then you get a little whiplash when you get into the ruts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not always perfect, but they do a wonderful job.
And there's some spots on East Road that get really soft because it's flat and it doesn't drain. But Tift Road has been the last number of years. It's been in really good shape. So, yeah.
Now the other great change in Cornish is the decline in the school enrollment.
Yeah.
Let's start by asking, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. When my daughter was in 8th grade at Cornish, and throughout her 8 years there were 10 kids in her class, so it was a really small number. but my son's class, there were 22
Well,
kids.
can you give us some dates so we can?
Oh boy, it's gonna be hard.
Approximately.
Well, she graduated in I believe 1998 from high school, so that would be 1994 when she was in 8th grade. A class of 10. It wasn't unusual to have small classes. I remember Linda first had both 2nd and 3rd grade at the same time when they were building the gym. But my son's class was unusual. There were 22 kids, and the majority of the class were young boys, which was a pretty, rebel-rousing group of kids that had an awful lot of fun together. But I've watched it dwindle, and I know that it's getting smaller and smaller. But it's always kind of been the heartbeat of the community, and I really hate to see it combined with another school. But probably in the future that will happen. I just wonder why. Young families, maybe they can't afford to live here. I'm not sure. I know it was a struggle for us when we first moved here from Connecticut to, find jobs and get situated, and especially to meet people. My husband, before he got involved in the film industry, was a merchant marine. So I was here with my little infant daughter, and, how do you meet people in Cornish? It's not easy. So,
Jim, your thoughts?
I am really happy that we have gotten out of the SAU with Claremont. And I think that committee did a wonderful job in cost sharing with Plainfield. And I think the next step for both Plainfield and Cornish is going to be consolidation. The Vermont legislature really dictated this in Vermont, and I think we need to look very closely in the cost to run 2 physical plants in both schools, because where both schools are having the same enrollment problems. And as Regina said, I think the issue is the price of homes in Cornish. You think about the zoning and the 10-acre maximum in areas, and I think young people, it's hard for them to get started in Cornish. There aren't a lot of starter homes that are on the market in Cornish. So, but I don't see that turning around in the next number of years, and so I think that consolidation is something that we ought to seriously look at.
And I think the state of Vermont and the state of New Hampshire are both experiencing, this event of, kids moving away and just not coming back, or coming back when they're a lot older. And, it's hard. We want to keep young people around, keep things interesting.
I always say that when we do these interviews, I'm not advocating a position, but I would mention what other people have said about this, that many people in Cornish feel that there is a conflict between our land use policies and the fact of our school enrollment. For example, there's a 5-acre zoning. Current use does take land out of the possibility for development for young families with children. And recently, that came out with the planning board survey that came around. There are options in Cornish whereby we could have some 1-acre zoning. Again, I'm not advocating this, but people have raised this point. Would you comment on this?
Well, the house that I lived in, it was on a 0.78 of an acre, so, that was manageable for us. But still, you think about taxes, and when I moved in with Jim and we got married, I remember someone saying to me, well, when you rent your house out, make sure they don't have any children, because it's a burden to the taxpayers. And I'm thinking, whoa, I didn't even think about that aspect. So of course a family moved into the house because it was made for a family. But it is impactful. And
we just have a visitor that started.
Yes, it's a sage.
Sage.
16-year-old sage.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. But you actually were told that. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I think people are protective, and I think our tax rate was pretty high on that little piece of land that we had, and it was tough.
Jim?
Yeah, I'd like to just comment on one thing you said, is that the current use prevents the development, but you can take land out of current use. And, you know, I am a proponent of current use. And I understand that people that don't have the current use feel that the property tax is not equitably shared. I understand their point of view, but you know, if you look back at why we have it, and I think it makes more sense. In the early '60s, there was rampant growth, uncontrolled growth in the southern tier of New Hampshire. People from Massachusetts were moving in. The developers came in and were offering top dollar for property, farms, any big tracts of open land, and putting housing developments, which then drove because of the need for additional infrastructure, new schools, drove the property taxes way up. So you had people, especially people on fixed income or farmers, who couldn't afford to stay on the land, and so they were selling out. So in 66, 67, there was a group put together, primarily farmers, environmentalists, conservationists, large woodland owners, and they petitioned the legislature, and in I believe it was 1968, they changed the New Hampshire Constitution to allow for current use, to tax property at how it was being used versus the market value. Are there unintended consequences of this? Yes. Have the legislature tried to change it over the years? Yes. About every 5 or 10 years, there's talk about changing it. So far, they haven't. But you know, I don't think if people don't have current use, if you change that, then people can just put a conservation easement on the land. Now they lose any flexibility of subdividing that at a later date and building on it. And the taxation of property with an easement is exactly the same as the taxation of property with a current use. I think the other thing that's interesting to look at is the fact that most current use property is larger tracts of land. And so on a dollar basis, those large tracts of land, the landowners of those larger tracts are paying a lot more dollar-wise to the town than, for instance, Regina, where there are 0.7 or 0.8 acres of land. Percentage-wise, it's different, but dollar-wise, it's.
You would agree with Steve Taylor that current use represents a transfer of property tax.
Yes, but you know, I think in the interview you did with George Edson, I thought he brought up a really interesting point, and that is we haven't really enumerated what that is. And that there ought to be a way to calculate what is that transfer.
The impact.
What is the impact on people that don't have the current use? And I'm guessing it's not as large as people think it is, but I don't know that. And I think George has got a valid point.
I think people who question it, they're not questioning farmland as such. If people, the majority of income comes from farming activities. Current use, is fine. I think there are questions about other usages of it, and I did read, for example, when current use came in, $800,000 was removed from the tax rolls.
Wow.
So that is a significant amount.
It is.
And we all want to preserve open space. Maybe people have said we could do a little more the other way too, to try to encourage younger families to come in.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to looking at ways to make it more equitable. I would hate to see it just say, well, we're going to get rid of it, because I think we'd run into the same. I mean, I've had 2 families in Cornish tell me that they would not be, and they were both retired couples, would not be able to stay on their property if they didn't have current use. They couldn't afford the property tax in Cornish. And, to me, that's sad. But
I originally come from New Jersey, and I saw farmland disappear immediately, covered by development. I don't think that's the case up here, there's no sewage, no water to
Yeah.
develop that. But yes, I mean, it is a concern. Well, thank you for sharing your views. I've tried to ask people, actually they brought it up to me, they said these are issues. They would like to have a school continue here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It would really break my heart to see it go, but, it's,
My kids didn't go to school
Understandable.
here, so I don't have that emotional attachment to the school here.
Many people say the school is the way they meet people.
well, that's when my kind of social life, really began, is when my kids started
When they
going to
took
school.
school.
And, Caroline Storrs,
Yeah.
she was a fabulous teacher whom my son loved. And was just inspired by her. And I think my daughter had her in kindergarten. So, and then she was, I think, the 7th and 8th grade English teacher. And, so they had wonderful experiences. The hard part, though, is coming from such a protected community and such a small school, and then going off to high school where all of a sudden you went from a class size of 10 to a class size of 200. Both of my kids went to Hartford High School, and I know it was a really rough transition for them.
Was it?
My daughter was in her glory, because it was like, wow, I didn't even know there were so many people. And it was a great school. She was a soccer player, and that was thanks to the Claremont soccer program. And Cornish, as small as it was, always had great sports teams and a lot of
We don't have them
support
anymore.
from the community.
No sports
Those days
team.
are over. I didn't even
Yeah.
know that. They had baseball and, of course.
Well,
they
they're
had football.
combining with
Soccer.
Plainfield.
Plainfield,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, they were playing basketball at the time in the town hall. And then they started the movement to build the
people have said
gym.
that. Yes.
So,
yes,
I was a part of that,
Yeah.
happening. It was so exciting
You
to
had
know
to
that
sit
new
right
gym
on
was
the
coming
court.
in. Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yes,
It really
yes,
was.
yes.
It was great.
Yeah, I
But,
didn't realize that, yes.
my kids love school. And even high school, everybody talks about, there's so much truancy. And I said, man, my kids couldn't wait to go to school because, that's kind of where,
Good.
their social life and, educational.
Well, I think that I've covered the questions that I wanted to ask, and I would like to give you an opportunity. Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered? Are you going to stay on as head of the Conservation Commission?
I wouldn't mind taking a break. They had asked me to do it when I was still working, and I said that I just couldn't. I traveled so much, would miss meetings, and the first meeting after I retired, Bill Gallagher was the chair at the time. And the first meeting after I retired, he said, "Jim, I think I remember you saying, once I'm retired, you would be willing to be the chair. I make a motion that Jim's the chair." And I agree, and everybody, and so they passed it. So, I enjoy it. It's a great group of people with diverse points of view. I think we're have the best working group right now that we've had. And I think that's mainly because we're getting younger people in. We had very few people under 55 or 60 when I first became chair. And we've now got some 30-somethings on the chair, and they bring a whole new energy and outlook. And I think that the answer is maybe. Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add, or that we haven't covered?
No, I don't.
Jim?
I can't think. I think this is a very special town with really great people in it, and thoroughly enjoy living here. When I first moved here after my mother passed and I inherited, I had planned to come for a year, clean the house out, and then move back up into, probably not Norwich, but somewhere further up in the Upper Valley, and rent the house. I wasn't going to sell it because it may go to my kids, but after a year being here, I thought this is where I want to be. So I'm here for the duration.
This is a very special place.
Yeah, it is. It is.
We spend until the sun sets. We're out all summer long. I mean, it's just so beautiful and so special. And his mother established some beautiful gardens that we keep going, and it's
It is a beautiful spot, yes.
It
Yeah,
really
we feel
is.
very
First time I've been up
fortunate.
this far.
Feel very connected
Yeah,
here.
and we have it. You can't see it today because it's cloudy, but our view to the west is over to the Green
Very
Mountains. So we
beautiful.
see Killington's right in the middle, and so we have the
And you
whole.
see Scutney from down
And
below.
we see at Scutney, so we have great sunsets.
We have trails around, trail system to snowshoe, and
Okay.
yeah, so it's very enjoyable.
Well, thank you very much. I
Thank you.
very much enjoyed it, and
Great.
very
So
pleasant
did
time.
I.
And I always say to Billy at the end of the interview, "Okay, Billy, that's a take."